Hey students, this is Travis and this is week 3 of P4, Proverbs during pandemic for Plymouth Park. Now we spent the first 2 weeks in Proverbs 1, so today we're going to move on to Proverbs chapter 2. And I'm sure you've noticed that the Proverbs are all about wisdom and knowledge and understanding, and nothing changes as we move from chapter 1 to chapter 2. So listen or grab a Bible and follow along with me as I read Proverbs chapter 2, verses 1 through 5. It says, "My son, if you accept my words and store up my commands within you, listening closely to wisdom and directing your heart to understanding. Furthermore, if you call out to insight and lift your voice to understanding, if you seek it like silver and search for it like hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and discover the knowledge of God." You know, I told you a few weeks ago that these Proverbs are written from King Solomon to his son. So you notice that in verse 1, he says, "My son." And what Solomon is telling his son is he's telling him the type of attitude that he needs to have in his quest for wisdom. And these things apply not only to Solomon's son, but they apply to all of us, to you and I, and to everyone. And so 3 attitudes we need to have in our search for wisdom. First, we see in verses 1 and 2 that we need to have an attentive attitude. You know, ultimately, wisdom comes from God, but God can speak wisdom to us through others who he puts in our lives. So when someone is seeking to put wisdom into our lives, usually someone older than us, we need to listen to them. Verse 2 says, "Listen closely to wisdom." Literally, the phrase means to stretch out your ear to wisdom. So we need to pay close attention. We need to have an attentive attitude. We move on. We see in verse 3 that we need to have an urgent attitude. It says, "If you call out to insight and lift up your voice to understanding." Those phrases, call out and lift your voice, those are phrases that are normally used to describe someone who is in danger or distressed and they're calling out, they're crying out for help. So the same urgency that you would have if you were in great danger and you were just crying out at the top of your lungs for help, that's the same urgency we need to have as we cry out for wisdom, as we seek wisdom in our lives. So in our search for wisdom, we need to be attentive and we need to be urgent. And third, we see in verse 4 that we should have a determined attitude. You know, I don't know about you, but when I lose something or when someone hides something from me, I won't give up until I find it. I won't quit looking. I won't quit retracing my steps until I find what I'm looking for. And that's how serious, that's how determined we need to be about finding the wisdom of God. And we see why in verse 5. It says, "Then you will understand the fear of the Lord and discover the knowledge of God." So if we have an attitude to find wisdom that is attentive and urgent and determined, then we'll certainly find wisdom. And verse 5 tells us how great that is, because when we find wisdom, then we'll understand the fear of the Lord and we'll discover the knowledge of God. And this is so great, but I've yet to tell you about the condition. You might have noticed the word "if." The word "if" is used 3 times in verses 1 through 4. "If you accept my words" in verse 1. "If you call out to insight" in verse 3. "If you seek it like silver" in verse 4. The word "if" represents a choice we all have to make. We can gain wisdom, we can discover the deep things of God, but only if we seek it attentively and urgently, and if we have a determined attitude that won't give up. This commentary that was written by Dwayne Garrett, it says it better than I can, so I'm just going to read this to you. And he uses the pronoun "he" because Solomon was writing to his son, but this applies to males and females, this applies to all of us. It says, "The if represents a decision that every young man must make. He can either go in the way of wisdom and find life, true love, and most importantly, God, or he can turn his back on wisdom and find only bitterness, isolation, and death. One cannot opt out of making this decision or choose a little of one and a little of the other." We all must make a decision. And there's no riding the fence. There's no a little of this, a little of that, a little wisdom, a little foolishness. We have to be all in on our search for wisdom. So what will you do to gain wisdom this week? Will you simply pray and ask God for wisdom as He tells us to do? Will you open your Bible and read and search for wisdom? Or will you talk to someone older and wiser than you and ask them to share the wisdom of God with you? Whatever you do, make sure you spend some time this week seeking wisdom. Be attentive, be urgent, and be determined about it.